Sonic Talk.
Hello everybody and welcome to Sonic Talk episode 516, recording today, Wednesday. What is it? It's the 6th of December 2017. This is a podcast dedicated to all things music technology, all that kind of stuff. It has controllers, software, analog synthesizers, all of those things that are to do with music technology. And want to say welcome to our sponsors. Thank you very much, Isotope, for providing the prize, which is a copy of Ozone 8. You'll be able to win that. And we also will be announcing the winner from that last week's show as well. So please do stay tuned for that. First of all, we're going to say hello to our guests. So I'm going to start. We have a brand new guest. This is Mr. Yoad Nevo, who is in his studio in London. Yoad is basically... would you say superstar mixer and producer was a bit over the top, or would you be happy with that particular description?
Well, if you say that, then I wouldn't mind.
Excellent. Well, Yoad, of course, I mean, this is your facility that you're in at the moment, right?
Yes, it is.
Is that an SSL in front of you, or am I not?
It's actually an Eve. It's an Eve V51. From 80, most of it is from 84, although it's actually, I don't know if you can see that, but it's it has more channels. It's 60 channels, and that's only, it was 72, but I could only fit 60 in this room. So but I made it out of two desks.
Wow.
One from 84 and one from actually one from 81, sorry, one from 81 and one from 84. But they're kind of integrated together.
So as most of the stuff you're doing there, I mean, are you working on mixes or tracking? I mean, what's the kind of bulk of your work?
It's quite diverse because I do anything from writing to mastering and all of the between, but I also develop plugins and other products for Waves. Mainly, and so it's quite diverse. So I do a lot of mixing, a lot of mastering, a lot of production work that sometimes involves me in writing, but sometimes not. That kind of stuff. So every day I would do a few different things. This wonderful times we live in allow me to move between different stuff in one day. So I would mix something for 2 hours, then I would go and do something else, do a bit of mastering, do a bit of something else. I can use the analog desk, obviously mainly for recording, but also for summing. So the way I have it set up is that it works like a huge summing mixer, and which allows me to recall mixes very quickly because I just line up the faders with tones, and then I'm back in the mix. So that's
I was going to ask you about that, because obviously, I mean, analog consoles are great, but they've got that irritating habit of having their settings changed with every session that you do.
So I definitely need to check. Usually it's fine, but I need to check so I have a calibrate session which I load in Logic, and that throws minus 18 dBFX tones to all the faders, and then I make sure that usually it's fine, but sometimes it needs a little bit, it's a living kind of organism, so sometimes things change, and but it's definitely worth it because the sound is amazing.
Well, it's funny, people, that it's forgotten, isn't it, in many ways, that now that SSL has become this kind of like holy grail. Back in the 80s, the SSLs were considered to be cold and harsh and digital, and Neve was the thing to have. It was bizarre how things turn around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's I always loved mixing on Neve desks, but mainly old ones, 8068 and things like that. I never liked the VR. Mixing on VRs, great for recording though, but when I used to work kind of not hybrid but fully analog, I used to mix on SSLs because it's just an amazing and still because I do like 90% of my mixes in the box, and then I would use SSL emulations because that's my main kind of tool. So I just work on SSL stuff almost on every channel.
Right.
But then you run it through the desk and you get this warmth and kind of width. And
yeah, no, absolutely.
yeah,
I mean, analog summing is the way to go. Well, lovely to have you, Johan. We look forward to speaking to you more in a moment. We also got, we haven't had him for a little while. It's Daddy Div Kid Ben Wilson. How are you, Ben? And of course, still a new. Excellent, Ben. Div Kid, of course, YouTube channel on YouTube, covers a lot of modular and synthesis topics. And yeah, what have you been up to then, Ben?
Yeah, a lot of that. It's funny you mentioned Daddy Div Kid. I've just mentioned in the YouTube chat, hi everyone, how's it going? And that's the first thing. Getting enough sleep. Are you getting enough sleep?
You look all right.
I am. Yeah, well, as far as I usually go, yeah. Yeah, getting enough sleep. Just lots and lots of modular videos, all the stuff trying to get in there before Christmas, I guess. People wanting things announced before NAMM. Obviously coming in January. So yeah, new AGH products, a new spring reverb, the Intellijel Rainmaker. I did some stuff for Future Music Magazine, just doing some follow-up for that. Yeah, just lots and lots of modular sim stuff.
Excellent. Well, great to have you. Great to have you aboard as ever. And of course, we have Mr. Steve Hillier, who's gradually coming into contrast focus as the sun goes down behind him in his Christmas grotto, with, I'm told, the glow of a real fire to his stage left.
Yeah, we keep it kind of cozy down here in Brighton. I just wanted to build on something that we just mentioned before about summing in the SSL desk and sort of splitting out components of a mix. Something that I discovered in the last couple of months. I've been doing quite a few live shows. I had to change how I was sort of sorting out my individual tracks coming out of Ableton Live for a variety of different reasons, and I did a little experiment, which was, rather than sending my stereo mix out to the engineer and just hoping he or she could cope with that, splitting out the individual components into 8 channels. So it had all the percussion on a stereo pair, bass on one, and all that kind of thing. So it wasn't too complicated, but I mixed it so that the engineer could just pull up the faders in like unity gain. So there was no real work for them to do unless they had to do some sort of salvaging the sounds in EQ, and the difference in quality was extraordinary. It really was. So I just thought I'd mention this to recommend to anyone who's watching this, who's doing sort of live electronic stuff. It's so tempting to send to a front of house person their stereo mix that they've assembled on stage, but if you can just split it out a bit and give that engineer just the scope to jump in, or just to let the mixing desk do its work, the results are it's an extraordinary leap forward, at least for me.
Oh, that's really interesting. I guess that makes sense because, I mean, a live situation, you're hearing it on about the biggest kind of air moving thing, certainly for a while. So you're going to hear the difference much more sort of dramatically, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. And plus also, with the best will in the world, you can't, if you're standing on a stage and all you've got is a monitor or two, if you're lucky, pointing into you from the ground, you're really not getting a representation of what's coming out at the front of house. I mean, this is something that would be obvious to most musicians, but maybe not so much to electronic people who are mainly used to working, in their small studios or bedrooms or whatever. But then it was also just the fact that there seemed to be a retention of clarity in the parts by spreading it onto separate channels, which I think is what Noah was saying before. And it certainly works in a live situation. So I would recommend that. I really would. I
can understand. I guess I'd imagine. I mean, because you've got a physical DAC coming out, and if you're putting everything through it, then you've got the fixed dynamic range of that single or that pair of outputs, whereas if you're splitting out, they can occupy kind of more of the dynamic range, or maybe that's just
I think that's true. And another thing, Nick, is if you're making changes to the mix live, if you're pulling up like a solo instrument or just something you want to draw more attention to, if you get things wrong at your end, all the engineer can do is mute you. If you're just sending down like something absolutely terrible. But if it's something that's slightly out of control on just one channel, you've given them scope to find the offending instrument and adjust it so the show survives, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, top tip. Thank you very much. Well, let's crack on with a bit of news then. Some sad news, ladies and gentlemen. I'm terribly sorry, but this is now happening. rather bleak yet short video with a sort of with a dark message is news that the Dreadbox Erebus, which is one of my favourite little mono synths, is now being discontinued. They're going to keep producing it until stocks are over. But that's it. I mean, only 2 short years in the life of that synthesizer, and it's an interesting strategy to take. I'll come to you first, Yoad. I don't know. Are you I could see there's some stuff in the background. Is that Eurorack stuff, or is that 500 series effects processing?
Well, no, that's a Eurorack stuff, which I reluctantly had to succumb to, basically getting into. I was trying to avoid it for years. I use a lot. You can't see it, but I have loads of synths here. I have about 50 or whatever, or I think more probably, hardware synthesizers. Many of them are analog, but some Waldorf stuff as well. Yeah, so I finally had to get into that, and that's just the beginning. I just got into it about a couple of months.
That's the start. Oops.
Yeah.
Have you got any Dreadbox?
Ben knows. No, so that's the thing. I always, I never had to really work on a small scale kind of stuff. I always have, I have my SH101, my Minimoog, my, all these kind of, like Polyfox, actually, we mentioned it before. So I know the Dreadbox it's actually sounding quite good, but I don't know, there's something about desktop boxes that I don't really have where to put them.
Yeah, well, I imagine I can understand the problem there.
Yeah.
Well, you should try it out. I mean, one thing that I did find, both you and I have worked with Golfrap. In fact, Yoad has remixed one of the tracks that I co-wrote with Golfrap, which is a nice connection. But when I took the Erebus, I've told the story before, when I took the Erebus up to Will, because he asked me to do some work on the last record, and I thought I'll bring a couple of synths. It just kind of cleared a path through all of his really expensive stuff and sort of stated it's all right, I'm here, I can occupy this space, and it really held its own, so I can thoroughly recommend it. I don't know whether you, Steve, have had the opportunity to enjoy that, and whether you would shed a tear at its demise.
Well, I mean, mixed feelings on this. Yes, I have used this unit, and you're absolutely right. It's got a beautiful sound, and it commands itself in a mix. I really like it, but I haven't got one myself. And then the reason why I haven't got one is for precisely what Yoad said. The desktop format for me just doesn't work. I've got my mixing desk. What I would really like is for these guys to produce something that could fit in a rack. I don't mean Euro rack. I'm talking
Absolutely.
about the old 19-inch format. Just for it would be easier for me to store, and also crucially for what I do, it would be easier for me to move around for live. So if the Dreadbox guys are listening, please take that as a little tip from me. But in the meantime, I kind of wonder whether, because this is such a popular synthesizer, as far as I can tell, whether, first of all, they're bringing out a new version of this machine, which would be really exciting, and also whether this is something to do with the brand. As in, if you stop production after just a couple of years, there's only going to be a limited supply in the market. And so it becomes something to be sought after, which would really help the company for future products, if you know what I mean. So I wonder if that's going on there.
Yeah, you might be right. I don't know. What do you think, Ben?
Sad to see it go, I guess. Again, it's not something I own, but I've tried in a strange way, because I don't see it as that kind of Moogish, Morgish in tone. It does still do that. Here I am. As you said, it's just that it clears the waters and it's there. And it's usually kind of the reserve of a Moog to do that. Other things tend to sit in the mix a bit nicer and play friends with other instruments a little more. But excited for a version 3, I think. And I definitely mirror, despite all this modular stuff to the side of me, a rack version would be great. My desk's 2-tiered. I've got this kind of rack space that I'm not using. I'd love to bung a Synth or 2 in there. I was excited when the DeepMind from Behringer was announced as a rack unit. And as well, I feel a bit safer traveling with these things. Working in colleges and putting gigs on, we have things like a Korg Triton and other bits of things in a rack. And there's a certain safety to just having a good box of stuff sounding good that I can chuck around in a rack a little bit. I'd be scared stiff of leaving college students with my little desktop Erebus if I had one.
Don't do it.
No, nothing's going near those guys.
No.
So yeah, I'm excited to see where they go. They're an interesting company, Dreadbox, definitely.
I wonder, and this is purely speculation because they've just done the Hades kit and they're starting to do some kit stuff, and I wonder whether they're actually maybe changing their manufacturing process, so they're clearing out all the stuff that they would have in the shop, as it were, and be putting together, on benches by hand, because they might be going to place and pick stuff, and so they're moving it all out of the way and clearing the stock so that they can then bring a new generation of synths forward, which are going to be easier for them to manufacture, because it's always been a problem, availability for their stuff, which kind of adds to the kudos. But sometimes it's like, oh damn, I could have sold twice as many if I could have made twice as many. So it's one of those, and I don't think it'll change the ethos of the company too much. So I wish them luck, and I just wonder whether it is that. But yeah, be sad to see it go. I'm glad I've got mine, and I would never part with it. It's one of those instruments that I would, any two synths what would you want? And be like, yeah, that might actually be one of them, because it's just such a lovely little thing. Right
were
here.
They, sorry, Nick. I was just going to say, were they all through-hole components still? I think, weren't they?
Yeah.
Which would probably speak to it being quite difficult to get made. I know there's a certain kind of magic, as people like to think, around through-hole, but I was talking to Alan at AGH Synths about this, and he just said, I don't think electrons know the difference in terms of what they're running through on the circuit. It does what it does. I'd welcome them going SMD and getting more out. I think that stuff would shift like crazy if they could make it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, we both have a common friend of an engineer. We've talked about this, the idea of this sort of SMD and multi-layered circuit board technology. If you design it right, it's actually way better than a poorly designed hand-built circuit board, because you can make sure that the signals are far enough apart, and you don't get any looping and earth stuff. I know, yeah, you're in a position where you probably, I don't know what monitors you use, but if anyone could hear the difference, I'm guessing you probably could, seeing as that's what you do as well.
Yeah, I use ATC 100. CM or SM or whatever.
SCM 100s. I love those.
SCM, yeah, they're really good monitors. What I like about them is that you can monitor really quietly, which is what I do. And because when you monitor hard, like loud, your ears actually get shut physically. They have muscles that shut them, like your pupils. Responding to light, and when you listen, when you monitor quietly, you're actually getting the best out of your senses, out of your hearing sense. So, and also protecting your ears, and the ATCs allow me to do that, because they sound amazing loud when you give it a blast and want to enjoy it, but they also sound really, really good quiet. They have very good detail on them. But I mean, I used to be much more fussy about signal path and stuff like that. I used to, back in the day when I used studio machines, I used to go, especially on SSL desks, where the signal path is not, as pure as Neves, and kind of more transformerless and all that. So I used to go from the insert out and take a long XLR and go straight into the back of the studio machine, not bypassing any, obviously, bus and fader and all that kind of stuff, and also fetch bays and things. But these days I just don't have time for that, and I just want to get on with with what's on hand. And but I guess it just, whatever sounds good, it doesn't really matter. It's also, we live in a day and age that it's, a lot of it is about lo-fi and all that. So whether something sounds pure and with lots of headroom, does it really matter? Sometimes you actually want something to be squashed and kind of and sometimes you don't want that bigger than life sort of thing, and you want something to fit in the mix, not to cut through it. So I don't know, it depends.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Can I just ask you a quick question? You were talking there about monitoring levels for making a mix, and you say that the speakers that you're using enable you to monitor quite quietly and still hear what you need to hear. What would you describe as being the sort of optimum level for mixing? Is it just sort of regular listening level, like as if you were listening on a television or something, or what would you recommend?
For me, it kind of is. I have underneath here, it's all discrete resistors. So rather than a potentiometer, it's actually steps.
Yeah.
So you can have a kind of a designated listening level, and for me, it's nearly all the way down. I listen very quietly. I would say more quietly than the level to which I watch TV and stuff like that, because you just want to hear dialogue and stuff like that. But when you sit in front of the near fields or the ATCs, you completely focused on that, and obviously the listening environment is crucial as well. You can't do it in like a normal living room, obviously, so you have to have a well-treated room, and everything is kind of it allows you to be working like that. But I would say I think, to the annoyance of the people I work with, especially when writing and programming and being creative, people want it really loud and all that. But the way I work is I usually work on the sound, on sonics, as well as being creative, so it's at the same time. So for me, it's kind of important to know what's going on, and I can only understand what's going on if I listen to it basically in low level, really.
That's interesting. So you don't want anybody in your room with a dreadful cold or loud clothing messing about a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Thank you very much for that. So that stocks are gonna, they're gonna keep selling until stocks run out, but that's it. They're not making any more. Let's get on to this one. This is I found a video online. This is actually what's it called? Trueno. Let's see if I can get the volume a bit louder. So this is, it looks like a plugin, but actually what it is an analog synth on a USB stick that you plug in with analog circuitry that's then brought back into the digital domain through the USB audio interface and returned as a plugin. So you run it as a plugin within your DAW. You can run it standalone as well. And it's got a Polyvox style filter, and it's quite an interesting concept. I mean, in some ways you might think it's a bit of a weird concept, because what's an analog synth on a chip? Now, I'm going to come to you, Ben, because it's an interesting idea. I've never seen it done before. I don't know if you have. But as I said, the guy came to visit me yesterday, so I can answer some questions if anyone has them.
Ah, perfect. It's strange. A big thing about real hardware, be it processors, compressors, desks, or synths, Eurorack, it's the interface for me, and I think software sounds amazing. So I don't quite get the market for it. I'm not against digital. There's plenty of plugins that I think sound really, really good. But if this is functioning like a plugin, I don't quite get the point, if I'm honest. It doesn't sound any better from that demo than other kind of analog modeling, like Monarch in Reactor, or some of the Diva plugins, or Serum by X for Records. So I don't really get what it's giving me.
Okay. I'm not sure I can answer that questions on a philosophical level, but I can certainly answer them on a technical level.
Is it to go technical? Sorry, are they real VCOs, or are they DCOs like in the Juno?
No, they're VCOs. It has to actually tune. So you switch it on and it has a tuning routine, so it does tune. I mean, it also has digital waveforms. So you've got, I think there are 256 digital waveforms as well as the analog waveforms as well. So it does, and that's the thing I found. It was kind of curious, because it's like, oh, it needs tuning, and you press the button and it tunes up, because it runs at a certain temperature and it takes a while to achieve that temperature. So it's the same.
So I guess very hard to answer if the guy just came around yesterday. You've not had much time with it, but does it offer any kind of analog VCO mojo, if you like, or vibe that you wouldn't get in software, or is that hard to say?
If I'm honest, it didn't really, to my ears. No, it kind of sounded all right. It was fine, but then we brought up because Gaz was here as well. We were doing a review, and he brought up one of the Steinberg ones. I forget which it is, and we just ran that up, and it just went oof. There was more bottom end in the plugin than there was in the analog thing, but that's not uncommon. It just depends. I mean, we're only talking, I think it's 139 quid, so we're not talking high quality, but so it doesn't seem to offer that kind of mojo, no. So
yeah, it's the kind of philosophical thing for me. I don't quite get where to place it, because modeling oscillator drift, and actually most modern analog doesn't sound like what people think of as analog anyway. A company like Analog Solutions, I think, really offer vintage style analog. Things seem to drift that little bit more. So if that's not doing this, like the Pocket Operators or Volkers, they're around the same kind of price, but they offer a little quirky interface and they're good fun. Yeah, I don't get it, is my thing.
Okay. Steve, you were talking about being able to easily transport your synthesizers. Surely this is the perfect possibility, right?
Yeah, it is. But I don't know. Look, I think the bottom line of it is that if this sounds really good, then it gets a big thumbs up from me. I must admit, I've only actually heard what you just played across this digital stream, so it sounds all right to me, but I couldn't really tell. Bottom line, if it sounds really good, then I think there's going to be a real use for this, and largely because of two factors, which is the convenience of it in terms of its size.
Yeah, this is what it looks like. There it is.
Yeah, so that's pretty small, and also in terms of its price. So I'm just going to sort of work on the basis that it doesn't sound, incredible. So it's not like a new 303. I don't mean like a recreation of that machine, but it's a new small thing that just somehow sounds incredible. I'm just going to assume it sounds pretty good. But then I suppose the next question for me is, well, why would I personally want real analog circuitry as opposed to analog modeling like Ben's been talking about there? And I don't really know. I mean, as Ben's already said, the analog models that we have now in software are, they're superb. They sound really, really good. So I suppose actually on that level, where this would come in that would maybe help me, especially in a live situation, is that it wouldn't be taxing the CPU in my MacBook Pro, like, for example, Monarch by Native Instruments or Diva.
It's interesting you say that, because actually, in our experience, we did a quick CPU test, and it wasn't particularly light on the CPU. So you could cross that off your requirement list, unfortunately. But that might just be an efficiency of the code or the plugin or whatever. Yeah, but sadly, that's not.
Well, yeah, maybe they can sort that out. The next question would be, so just how convenient is this really? So the idea would be, right, so you plug it in, and then if you're using Ableton Live, you'd set up the input on there and a couple of faders, and off you go. But what about if you're using like a sound card to connect in some other hardware synthesizers? At that point, my understanding would be that you'd have to make an aggregate device. I'm talking about Macs here, by the way. I'm sure it's a similar concept in Windows.
Actually, I can answer that too. The answer is no. It doesn't become your sound card. It's piping the stuff back in via the return of the plugin. It's not actually replacing your main sound card at all, and you don't have to make an aggregate. That's the clever stuff. It's a bit like Overbridge in that way, where it's sort of is it auto aggregate, or it just kind of becomes another feed. It's quite interesting the way that works. So that I can answer that one too.
Okay, well, in terms of convenience, that's a huge one. So then my next question would be, What's the latency like? Would I have to spend a lot of time sort of optimizing buffer settings or whatever to get a nice solid, a solidly timed synthesizer part? Do you happen to know that, Nick?
You can tweak the buffer for the device itself, and I suspect that the higher CPU we had was because we were trying to set it at the lowest possible buffer. So I think it does have its own CPU kind of resources requirements for low latency settings. So yeah, there was not really a qualitative test. It was just a quick check.
Okay. Well, then I suppose for me, then the last question, and this isn't really a question for me because I kind of know where I stand on this, but for the market in general is. It's always going to be people out there who will insist on using analog synthesizers because they believe they sound the best. And without wanting to get into a debate about that, what we have here is a hybrid, don't we? So we have a digital interface, we have analog generated audio, but then before you hear anything, it's got to go through a conversion stage, right? So so it's A to C at that point. So is this going to be analog enough for the people who care about these things? And I must admit, I don't really know.
No,
and in the end, all of these.
I can't answer that either. But yeah, you're right.
No, it's completely subjective. But I think in the end, if it sounds incredible, or just really good, or really quirky, or just does a thing that you can't get anywhere else, I can see this doing really well, as particularly at that price point. Otherwise, there's a lot of questions. But I would certainly be interested in this in terms of the convenience, especially now that I've discovered that you don't have to make an aggregate device.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a kind of antithesis of what you're doing there with your synthesizers. I mean, what do you think on it?
I would start with the bottom line. Does it sound amazing? And that really that is the only thing that matters. If it sounds amazing, then it just does, and then I would want it. Although I have to say that I can't stand anything kind of dongle based. I'm not using any iLok. Well, I have to in Pro Tools, but it's kind of here, and then I have another one for my laptop. But any kind of any kind of dongle-based authorization plugins, I'm just not using. This is slightly different because it's like, I don't do live stuff, so I have synths in here, and this could be another one of them stuck into a USB hub and all that. I agree with Steve. I mean, it does go through an A to D converter. And I just wonder how much of the processing is actually done in the digital domain once it got converted. Also, there's an issue of the sample rate. So from what I read, the A to D is at 44.1 kilohertz. Now, what happens if your session is at 96 or 48? How good is the sample rate conversion algorithm? Obviously the A to D, and also what we talked about earlier about the signal path and the headroom and all that. Can you really fit good quality analog sound onto such a small chip? But I would go back to my initial thing. If it sounds amazing, and maybe it's one of those things that are just lo-fi and they just have a purpose and they just sound great, and that renders everything I just said to irrelevant. If it sounds great and it's a cool synth that
it sounds great, yeah,
cool noises out of, then it's great. And also I have to say that for myself, I actually like, unlike Ben, I like the screen interface. I do like that. I do like programming stuff, and maybe at one point we can talk about that. I have a whole controller here that, although it's a hardware controller that controls all the synthesizers that can receive either SysX or NPRN, or controller data. So they all come here, and I have a dedicated environment for all of them, and I find myself doing more stuff on the screen than on this thing, which is really convenient. So for me, and I like obviously software synths and stuff. So for me, the interface is not as much a problem as it may be for other people. But again, is it amazing?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get the sense that it was like, oh my God. I mean, it sounded pretty nice, but it didn't sound like one of those things that make you go, crikey, how much is that? I mean, I think one of the hard psychological barriers to get over is because you're running it as a plugin, you know, it's about the same price as a DSP-based plugin, but
exactly,
you can only run one at a time because it's linked to the actual hardware. So you've got that kind of, you know, you don't get the advantage of it being a plugin.
But at the same time, there's there's an argument that says that there's something, and I quite like that. In my setup, all the synths receive MIDI, and they all get triggered. When I touch any keyboard in the room. So that way I can layer stuff, and so I'm not doing like obviously multi-timbral, which is completely obsolete, but I'm not doing even separate MIDI channels or port and stuff. Everything plays when I hit the keyboard. So, and that allows me to layer stuff and distort stuff and whatever.
Oh, that's interesting.
It forces me to print everything I do. I can retrieve the sysx, so I get all the presets of the stuff I print, so I can always go back if I need to do a whatever key change or something like that at a later stage. But it forces me to print stuff to audio, and there's something about that which I kind of like, because you can sculpt the sound further. When something stays in MIDI, like plugins and stuff like that, then you tend to leave it at that state, and then you void yourself of the some of the benefits that audio regions can offer, like reversing stuff, fading in regardless of the envelope setting and stuff like that, chopping stuff, moving just one bit of a region, things to different channels and stuff. So I kind of like the idea of having to print stuff to tape.
Oh, that's a really interesting idea. So you effectively, I like the idea that every synth is just on and you just unmute the channel that you want to hear. So that's a really interesting approach. Perhaps we can talk more about your controller approach in a sec, but it's time to have a little word from our sponsors. This course is Isotope Ozone 8, which is the new mastering and track assistant version from Ozone. You get Mastering Assistant, which basically helps you set up your kind of initial session, and it goes a long way to providing that maybe the sort of processing you're looking for to start with as a starting point. Very useful, and in many cases gets it spot on pretty much first time, which is quite impressive to see. There's also tonal balance control, which gives you a visual representation of the sort of sound you're going for and the kind of parameters of which each frequency band should be within to achieve somewhere in that region. Very useful extra visual mixing tool. It's also possible to control external instances of Neutron 2 or other Ozones 8 within the same session, so you can bring the whole thing together, particularly if you're working at the mastering stage. Makes it very much great use. There's also track referencing. You can link up to a folder full of tracks and just A/B between them very quickly just to see what it is that you're going for and what your mix sounds like. Spectral shaping, there's another thing, straight back to mastering. I mean, there's so many ways which you can use Ozone 8, and we want to encourage you to try it out. If you go to isotope.com/ozone, you get access to a demo that you can check out straight away. And we've also got a competition this week. Last week we asked for the hashtag, let me see, what was it? It was Max Your Mix. That's right, we got a winner from last week. And last week's winner is a chap called Pierre van der Berg, and his Twitter handle is @PierreV. So at Pierre V, if you're with us, please do get in touch and we'll get iZotope to drop off a copy of iZone 8 into your account. And of course, we've also got another competition for this week. You can win another copy of iZone 8. We'll be announcing the winner next week. And the hashtag we're looking for this week is for great mixes. So for great mixes, that's as one word, and also the hashtag Ozone 8 to at Sonicstate and at iZotope Inc. So 4 great mixes, that's an FOR, not number 4, 4 great mixes, and the hashtag Ozone 8 to at Sonicstate, at iZotope Inc. And then entering will enter us into the competition. So thank you very much, everybody, for that. Right. Incidentally, actually, we're running Neutron 2 across the bus of this now. You may have noticed last week that all the levels got a bit higher up, and it was a bit more sort of broadcast ready. So we're using what we advertise, which is kind of good, I'm guessing. Right. What's the next thing? Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this one first, because this might lead to an interesting conversation. We can come back to Yoad about his controller setup. So this is new Electro-Harmonix volume pedal. Whoopee, you might think. But actually, the thing about this one is it's got a special tapered curve, which makes it more sensitive. It's also got 2 different impedance modes, so you can plug a keyboard into it. Obviously, it's just mono, but it's also only about $60, so it seems like a pretty cheap thing. I won't play the whole thing, because a volume pedal is a volume pedal. But there's a couple of things about this. I mean, foot control generally is one of those things you're either into or you're not into, and it's one of those things that when you try, you just think, I can't live without it, and it's one of those things that definitely kind of makes a lot of difference. I'll start with you, Yoad, because I'm guessing, have you got a load of stuff under the desk that you're kind of controlling with your feet as you go along for multitasking mixing?
Well, just a controller pedal, but I mean, I am, not many people know it, but I'm a guitarist actually. That's my main instrument. So so for me, like, a volume pedal is something very expressive. However, I never managed to really enjoy the sound of when when it's so I always find that the sound of actually playing with the volume knob on the guitar to be much more pleasant. And with the demo I saw there of the Electro-Harmonix pedal, it seems like the high Z input really works, and that allows you to have because it's always the argument, like, where do you put the volume pedal in the chain? So when you put it right after the guitar, it really, usually from my experience, it really kills the sound of the guitar, because the level, the output of the pickups on a passive circuitry is so low that it really kills it. But and then if you want to put it after the effects, obviously you want to put it before the delays and reverb. Otherwise, it sounds like in the demo that they show there, for some reason they put it after the reverb, and I find it very odd because the whole thing, I'm a Yes fan. So all this volume pedal, like Soon and all that, volume, like where volume swells, is something I really like. So I think I'm probably going to get it, although I have loads of volume pedals, but they seem to work well on keyboards, which is a little bit redundant. You don't really need that.
I guess for live and for expression, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously the great Vangelis is notorious for he's almost got like a kind of an organ bass pedal setup of volume pedals. But yeah, it absolutely makes sense.
But these days, why not use a MIDI controller, foot controller to control your fader in Logic or whatever, or to control different plugins and stuff, because you end up in the box anyway. You know what I mean? So there's no reason to. I'm also, my background is engineering. That's where I come from. So I'm very aware of signal to noise and things like that. So I rather do any volume processing at the very last stage as much as possible. But in this case, like, having the ability to actually to make it a part of your playing, like you're changing the volume knob and all that, it's quite amazing. I'm definitely going to get this pedal.
Okay. Well, that's a good. Steve, you play live a lot. Are you a kind of foot pedal guy? I mean, do you find that you need those extra controls, or do you sort of program around it?
I would like to would love to be able to do this thing well, and in fact, it's actually on my wish list for next year to get properly into expression pedals. Problem is, I've always been more of a rugby player than a footballer, and so consequently, I've got all the sort of like skill with my feet of an unskilled person with their feet. So it's been really, difficult for me to get into that. Having said all that, I think there's a lot of scope for this kind of unit for electronic performers. When there's not a great deal going on stage, any movement that the performer is performing becomes the focus of the audience's attention, if you know what I mean. And so if you've got, a left hand doing a filter cutoff or whatever, and a right hand adjusting resonance or glass of wine, if your foot is now adjusting the volume of the synthesizer, it all helps the audience to believe, because it's true, that what they're hearing is being created in front of them, in front of their very eyes, if you know what I mean. So even if it's not something that's necessarily going to have a big impact on the tone of what the electronic performer is doing, visually, I think it's actually pretty useful, and that's why I'm going to dedicate some time next year to doing this kind of thing. And also, I think. I throughout the years, I've used a lot of guitar pedals, particularly Electro-Harmonix. The rest of their range is superb, and it's nice just to have, some extra hardware on stage, again, that gives the audience the impression that something is being created in front of them. If you know what I mean, I don't want to overstate this. Beyond that, it's all the dexterity of a rugby player for me. Sorry.
I'm sorry to hear that, Ben. I mean, there are, this is obviously volume. I mean, you can get stereo foot volumes, but you also get CV control volumes, which will spit out CV control. I mean, is that something that you find? You see quite a lot of performers as well. I mean, some of them use that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, for me as a guitar player, it was drums first for me, followed shortly by guitar, well before synths and any production stuff. And yeah, as Yoad was saying about positioning of the pedal, I really like a volume pedal before my time-based effects, delays and reverbs, and that tends to be most of my guitar playing, kind of ambient, mod, textural kind of things at the minute. That's where my head's at. And yeah, a nice responding volume pedal. I think there's always room for one. I use the passive Ernie Ball silver one that everyone seemed to use. I forget what it's actually called. And it's sometimes under the desk with a synth stuff with a little interface in and out, or it's just on a guitar pedal board. I tend to use an expression pedal I reached over to grab it. This 7 dials CV Express module. Really simple, takes an expression pedal in, spits out every conceivable voltage, the inverse version, the normal version. You can change all the response on the pots. And yeah, when I want to do something and don't have enough hands, like Steve was saying, if you're maybe modulating cutoff and resonance and you just want to open the release on an envelope, having a foot to do it, I find really useful. It's definitely a performative thing, though. I think in a studio, I'd probably do it in the box, to be honest. But live, yeah, I think they're great. And if I'd have to play on it. If it has this kind of nicer tapered response, maybe I'd kind of swap for it, but I'd have to go try one.
Yeah, I don't know that it would work with CV, but certainly with volume, I'm sure. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, sorry, for the guitar, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Yoad, I just wanted to come... Sorry, were you going to come in there with Steve? I heard an intake.
Yes, just very briefly. It was interesting that Yoad was talking about being a guitarist. And something that was a big feature of my old band Dubstar's music was Chris, the guitarist, often used to do volume swells using the volume knob on his guitar. And of course, you can achieve that with a volume pedal. But the reason I mention this is that if you're using acoustic sounds and you change to use a synthesizer term, the envelope of that sound, you can go to sonic places that you just wouldn't normally associate with that instrument, if you know what I mean. So you can create a very glassy or kind of patio sound from, let's say, a Fender guitar, but simply because you're missing out the transient, the attack stage of that sound. So I think this is, in terms of sound design, this is where a volume pedal could be really useful to essentially just manipulate the sustain portion of real sounds, maybe from sample.
Yeah,
just a thought.
And you get that kind of articulation that you can't get so much. Yeah, well, I want to just come back to you. You were talking about you have this this sort of master controller that you run all of your synths on. I mean, what is it, a custom build thing, or is it just a kind of set of?
I know it looks kind of nice because it has wooden cheeks and stuff, but what it is it's a BCR 2000, which I find the most kind of.
It's the Behringer. Yeah, I've got one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really a really good machine, and basically I can't show the screen properly right now, but basically what we did with the assistant of my assistant, Keith Holmes, who worked really hard on it for months and months, we designed a system whereby each synthesizer, like the Juno with the Kiwi mod, which completely responds to control changes, for example, has its own environment page, and the environment looks like the layout of the BCR, so it serves as, because the BCR doesn't have any labels. I mean, you can scribble there, but then it would be for one thing. But the way we set it up is that you have cutoff, resonance, envelope amount, velocity, blah blah blah, which applies to all the synthesizers, and then you have VCF envelope, VCA envelope. So the layout is the same as much as possible for all the synths. Obviously, some of them have one envelope, some of them have two envelopes, some of them don't respond to velocity and all that. But as much as possible, so it's all compatible with. So you can pretty much do it just without any labeling. However, the what you see on the screen represents the layout of the BCR. So I have one environment page per synth.
Wow, that's a bit. Just to clarify, sorry, that's within Logic, isn't it? Because Logic is Logic
environment.
Logic environment. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then what I have is a screen set in Logic pair this environment page. So if I want to record, and also this number of screen set corresponds to the number of the preset number on the BCR. So if, say, I don't know, the Q, by the way, the Q, the world of Q occupies 4 pages. So it runs across, it's a huge synth. It's probably the biggest, kind of the most sophisticated, definitely hardware synth. Arguably, ever. Of plugins as well. But what you do is, so you recall, you go to preset number 33, which corresponds to the screen, and then if you want the further to tweak the parameters further, you go to which is one press of the button, you go to 34, and so forth.
Right,
and then
I
you
see.
just
So you've created these kind of meta editors for that thing. I mean, so in many ways, you're even though we've talked about the hardware interface, you've just created your own unified hardware interface for all of those synths, so that you
absolutely, which is great because obviously it all goes through Logic. So whatever you do, it gets recorded. Which with NRPN, it's a nightmare. With Sysex, it's a nightmare. But everything that is controller based, and also some of the synths that work like the Tetras. I have a couple of Tetras to get 8 voice, the link together.
Sure.
They run on NPRN, but the actual controller for the NPRN commands is done via MIDI control numbers. So you can still edit. You know what I mean? And then it gets converted to NPRN. So you can edit the automation if you like on. So I usually do a pass and then edit it if I need to. So it's
does
really
it does it work both ways? So when does it query the current set of settings for each synthesizer, or you just sort of start from scratch?
You have to. No, it can't. It can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, does sound like a lot of work, but I can see, considering, I was sort of going to add a flippant comment that is obviously you have to do that, because if you walked away from your monitoring spot back to your synths, you wouldn't be able to hear the mix because you have it so quiet.
Well, I have another set of speakers there, and sometimes I would walk to the Poly 6, although, and that's the thing, that when you control a Poly 6 from the screen or from a different controller, it kind of sounds different, because you feel like you have more possibilities, especially things like the Chroma Polaris, which the Super JX. Yeah, programming on the hardware, it's
not much fun
with the menus, and the alpha wheel and all that crap, and now you can just see all the parameters, so you get a whole new experience, which leads to different type of sounds that you can generate from it.
Yeah, I see. So you win some, you lose some. You gain with others, you lose with others. But yeah, if you've got a lot of interesting stuff. I'm just going to quickly mention we've just launched a T-shirt yesterday with synth meme people. There was a competition we ran ages back, which was for the users of synth memes to design a T-shirt, and they have in fact designed a T-shirt. I'm just going to bring this up, and this is the result of it. So just point out, when you get here, you can rest of the world, Americas, you can decide where you're going to get it from, but it's if I click on there, does something happen? Oh, I'll try Americas then. And it's a sort of play on the known pleasures, and it's PMW known pleasures. You can buy that from Teespring. In fact, I've actually got a 15% discount code, which is bit.ly/PWMT. So PWM T-shirt, I suppose, is the answer to that. So if you want to save 15%, I think if you order quickly, you might be able to get it before Christmas as well. So just wanted to put that out there. And obviously, if you're a member of Synth Memes Group, the admin there will have posted that. I want to say thanks to Jim Hayward for organising that, and also from Jason Mastrandrea for helping with the design of it. So I wanted to get this one in because I thought this was actually really quite a cool product. This is the HalfTime instant effects speed from Cableguys. It's really simple. It's just, it'll immediately half-time or quarter time or dotted time audio that goes into it. And what's really interesting about it is it will also allow you to frequency analysis, apply it to different areas of the frequency. I just thought that was pretty cool. I don't know, Ben, if you're, it's a pretty cool little plugin. It's only $10. I mean, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer, doesn't it? And it's the sort of thing that it kind of really works for that sort of DJ vibe where you can radically change the tempo and the timing. I mean, doing that in MIDI or in audio is a real pain, but something like this could be really useful. Oh, I think you're muted. Somebody take a drink. Yeah. Someone take a drink.
Sip a drink. It sounds really good as well. I've played around with, I forget the company, but it had two big kind of pitch. One was a pitch wheel and one was a formant wheel, big blue interface on the plugin. And I used that a lot because it was as quick as this seems to be, but it didn't sound anywhere near as good. I mean, this is going back years as well, so technology will have changed. But yeah, it's not doing half time though, is it? It's doing half pitch.
Half pitch. No, I think it's
slowing everything.
Yes, I think it does. Yeah, no, I think it does as well, because I noticed there are a couple of shots where it pitched it down, but it also slowed it down as well.
Okay.
So I think it
some
does.
Parts of the demo, it does just drop an octave and then come back again.
Yes.
You hear it in the drum beat. It doesn't actually buffer and really spread the whole thing. But yeah, it sounds really good. And I didn't see it was $10 or £10 at that price. Yeah, it's a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, nice little fix. Steve, I don't know whether you're looking for some Pluginspiration. Oh, I think I'll coin that word. That might be something I can use for the show title. Pluginspiration. Yeah, I like that. What do you think?
I like that. Well, I think first of all you're going to have to see whether the .com is available.
Yeah.
But, for your new word. But yeah, it looks like fun. £10, sure, why not? It wasn't clear to me. I did see this earlier in the week. It wasn't clear to me whether it was doing half time or going down an octave. I wasn't entirely sure. I think you guys may have just covered that, but I was distracted because it's so windy here that my bins have blown over and they're literally just here. So there was a bit of a distraction. Sorry about that.
That's no problem.
Yeah, but no, I think it could be a lot of fun, and I don't mean fun in a dismissive way. I think ultimately that's what music should be. And I know that back in the day when I was doing a lot of sampling and when I was putting tunes together, that I would often run things at halftime even slower, and to have that sort of mindset, available to me for a tenner in a plugin, it sounds like a lot of fun. So I think I'll probably give it a go.
Excellent. Yoad, I don't know whether, I mean, obviously you make plugins. I mean, do you find yourself kind of doing those kind of impulse buys for things that you see? So yeah, that's really cool. I'm going to get that.
Absolutely. I think it's really clever the way. So from what I can gather from the videos, what they do is they basically resample everything to twice the sample rate. So then when it plays back, it plays an octave below, which allows them to basically have a very low latency, I presume, because by the time you get to the next bit, it's already been slowed down. So you can regenerate. So you can start, bursting out the stream quite soon after you just hear after you get the input. So that's a clever idea. From what I can gather, it does that whatever the settings are, and then it allows you to do all that without having to go into time stretch, universe, which means that it can do it in relatively good quality. It's nice for a tenner, it's a no-brainer. However, for me, it kind of gives me the vibe of dubstep, which is a little bit.
Is that a turn off?
Yeah, so.
Well, I was thinking it would be really good for drones as well, for taking kind of like pads and stuff and just slow, that in the kind of pull stretch kind of vibe. Obviously, it doesn't go down 3,000% or whatever, but you could kind of take things and then just drop them down and maybe high things, and you get that grainy texture, which is sort of quite pleasant.
Absolutely. I mean, the grain texture obviously depends on the steepness and of your anti-aliasing filter, which usually is linear phase, which adds to the latency, blah blah blah, all that. But what I would really like to see, I mean, obviously it's great for live, but what I would really like to see in every host, in Pro Tools, in Live, in Logic, in Cubase, is the ability to just take a region and play it slower or faster. Not going into time stretch, but that mainly for drums. I mean, it would be great for drones and stuff, like you said, but just imagine dragging drums. So you don't really need to use samplers anymore for drums. You just drag stuff. I think that maybe FL Studio does that, but I'm not sure. To just drag stuff. Yeah, FL Studio does do it, but it in a way of their kind of step sequencer for drums. But I mean, in Logic and Pro Tools, just drag stuff, drag drums, do your programming on the screen with the audio. But then if you want to change the pitch for a few or one region, you can do it, and that it will stretch the time. Obviously, there's a kind of the problem of how it will represent the region and where the graphics would overlap and things like that.
Yeah,
that's
interesting.
Like
interesting.
See.
Yeah, but looks pretty cool. I mean, basically, like I say, it's $10, $12, €10, I think it is. But yeah, well worth checking out. That's the Cableguys half speed effects. Very, very simple. Ben, I realised that one of the reasons you came on is because also you've been looking at this other video. I wonder, has everybody got time if we quickly look at this Rainmaker thing? Is anybody in a rush, or can you all
I'm afraid I am. I have to get a train to Shoreditch to go and see Confidence Man tonight, which I'm really excited about.
Okay, well, how about you, Yoad? Are you around?
I'm good for a few minutes.
Okay, well, Steve, if you've got to head off, I mean, that's okay. That's no problem. We can say goodbye now if you're in a real hurry. Oops.
Yes, I'm afraid I am. But thanks very much for having me, and nice to meet both of you, Ben and Yoad. It's
is this your first time together? Oh, excellent! What a nice pairing. Yeah, and I want to also say, Steve, Ethernet cable rocks. Your video has been absolutely bang on, no glitching, nothing. That's the answer. So you get yourself.
It's the way forward, isn't it?
Definitely, and you could just get some of those mains extenders and stick it up in your workroom, and you'd be jobs are good.
It shouldn't be too difficult, should it? I'll work it out. Thanks very much, guys. See
you later, Steve. Thank you very much, SteveHillier.net. So let's play this one quickly, just because I know that Ben's also been looking at this, and I can't believe how.
Today we're looking at the Intellijel Rainmaker.
This is the inimitable Mylar Melodies. Great. This is a stereo delay with 16 taps, different filters on each tap, different pitches on each tap. Also does a stereo. What does it also do? Stereo multi-tap comb resonator. I mean, it looks insanely, and is no doubt insanely complicated, but the sounds it's coming up with are astonishing. It's the Intellijel Cylonix Rainmaker, to give its full title. And it just seems like this sort of... I can't think of any other delay that is as complicated in any other form, to be perfectly honest. So, in the sake of brevity, I'll come to you first, Div, because you've looked at this as well. It's an amazing concept, and one that's almost worthy of kind of Eventide H3000 sort of land, isn't it?
Yeah, it's... I don't know if you're going to see it. It is up there, around where my finger is.
It's top shelf stuff, is it?
Top shelf, yeah. Top shelf delay, yeah. It's totally amazing. I did the same thing, no doubt everyone watching is doing, and just went, oh God, it looks so complicated. I don't want to touch this. And speaking with Mylar Melodies as well, who did that video, which is fantastic.
38 minutes,
yeah. We both kind of felt the same, but as soon as you start to just press a couple of buttons and maybe flick through a few presets and then tweak filtering in the delay or the feedback path, it is absolutely stunning. One thing it does that's really amazing, because it's kind of the key trick for me, if you're ever kind of lacking any inspiration, it has a random mode, but not random as in everything just continues making weird bleeps and bloops. You hit a button that says random, it then essentially says, what do you want to randomize? At which point I tend to put everything, and then just trigger it once. And then these otherworldly textures just appear from nowhere. And I've sat and listened to recordings of them thinking, how would I even do that with anything else without spending 12 hours tweaking effects change? And it's great, just with that random button, just hit it. I don't like it. I do like it. I don't like it. And editing things is really quick. It seems like it isn't, but everything's really well labeled. So if you want to repitch the delay, it's literally pitch, turn the pitch up and down. It is way more simple than it looks.
Do you think there's that there might be room for a Rainmaker Lite edition, which all it actually has is the random button and an input and an output for much less cost?
I'd be up for it, because honestly, these textures, I don't like to. Well, I'm shameless. I do like to. What am I saying? I did do a video on this. I think I called it "Random Textures with the Rainmaker." Where I just run some drums in and I'm just in time, just one single gate at the start of the bar, it just hits the random. And each bar then just has a different kind of texture.
Oh, so you can trigger the random as well?
Yeah, there is a trigger button and a trigger input, but that trigger input can do many things. And again, it's as simple as just hitting trigger. What do you want the trigger to do? Either hit the random, it can turn reverse on and off in the delay buffer. It could turn comb settings up and down. It's really quick. So having some kind of rhythmic gate pattern or trigger, either from a keyboard or a sequencer or modules, it's really interactive. And there's CV over lots of parameters as well. Really comprehensive filtering. It can mimic analog delay quite well. It's big and it's expensive, but it kind of should be. It really is an amazing piece of kit.
Wow, yeah, it does look. It's got my juice. I don't know. I don't know whether you kind of use your external synth for processing. I mean, a balanced version, presumably for your world, might be a bit of fun. Or do you use kind of plugins for this sort of ethereal, otherworldly stuff?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, Logic's delay designer can pretty much do most of the delay section, not the comb filter, but for that the other plugins. So you can do stuff. The thing with Logic delay designer is there's no limit to the tap count, so you can have as many as your CPU will allow you to do, and you can use a pitch on each of them, resonant filter, high pass and low pass, panning, volume and all that. So you can do all the stuff, all the kind of pitch feedback thing, like and like the famous, David Bowie low sort of drum sound, that kind of
Eventide.
Speed of Life, snare drum sound and all that. The comb filter seems very very interesting, and it's about the combination of the two, and like Ben said, it's a randomizing, and the accessibility, the fact that it's hardware and it has knobs and stuff like that makes it more appealing. With regards to balance or not, I don't care about stuff like that. If something sounds good, I would run something. I have a feed from the HDIO, so I can run everything through a reamp and stuff like that. So for me, it's not an issue. Very interesting.
You'll have to get a bigger case though, Yoad. Looking at that, I can't see all of it behind you. But
coming back to that. So and to kind of, we talked about convenience and 19-inch rack stuff. So I built my Euro rack in 19-inch units, so it can fit into a rack or into multiple racks and whatever. So for me, that's when I realized that's the way to go, then that was the time that I bought the frames and stuff and started filling them up.
So what, you use those kind of like pre-made 19-inch rack frames that then you put inside a case so you can make it more robust or whatever if you want?
Yeah, because I have I don't know how many. I think I counted it once. It's probably like 100U system, or 200U system. I have 5 huge racks and stuff. So this could and it will fit into one of them, and then it can grow sort of vertically.
Danger. Yeah, right. Okay. Are you that kind of guy? Do you, once you get into something, you kind of obsess about it and continue, or do you kind of have to stop? Because obviously you've got to actually get on with the job of mixing records and doing what you're paid for, right?
Yeah, but definitely once I get, and that's why I managed to hold up and not, prevent myself from getting into it. I have to say it's not as severe as I thought it would be. It's fine. It's kind of under control. But yeah, obviously I need to get on with the job at hand. But sometimes you just need inspiration, and sometimes you just need to tweak knobs for no reason. That's part of what we do.
That's a great show title as well. I'm going to write that down as well. Sometimes.
.com.
Yeah. Okay. We'll share that. We'll share that domain. The results of that massive tweak knobs for no reason. I like that. Excellent. Okay. Brilliant. Well, it feels like we're probably getting towards the end, natural end of the show. We've lost a guest due to an impending train journey. I'll come back to you, Ben. What's next for you then? You still kind of getting everything ready for NAMM, because we've started our preps as well. It's kind of full on.
NAMM for me is not so much of a big one. I've never actually been. So for my coverage, I tend to wait on what everyone else does, and obviously with credit, repost and share some thoughts. But the Future Sound Systems Gristleizer modules, working with Chris Carter of Throbbing Gristle, I have 2 of them in. Videos, one online tomorrow, another start of next week. The new AGH synth modules. There's a huge list. I've almost forgotten. There's videos going up daily at the minute.
Wow.
So people that can't keep up, I hope you've got time over Christmas, because there's just hours of content. I've slightly changed the angle of some of my content, because I realised that, especially fans of this show and more general synth fans, some of this is a little bit of a minefield. So, while reviewing modules, I've tried to make them a tutorial for whatever that thing it does is. So if it's a Logic module, it will tell you what Logic is and how you might want to use it. So hopefully people are kind of getting use out of it, even if they're not interested in that company's equipment. Good idea. Just a lot of content. Gristleizer stuff, AGH synth, the new Music Thing Spring Reverb, the Rossum Assimilator, I think will be starting to be shown next year. That's going to be a highlight for me. Rossum-based sampling power in Eurorack should be good fun.
Excellent. Oh, thanks, Ben.
So, yeah.
Well, have a great. Well, I'll just go to Yoad first because before we say finally goodbye. So Yoad, obviously, you've managed to find a window in your busy schedule to join us, which we very much appreciate. I mean, what's next for you? Have you got a project you're currently working on? I mean, assuming it's stuff you can tell us about.
Yeah, I have quite a few. I'm always working on several projects at the same time, and like I said, this technology allows me to do that, and it's great. No longer are the days where I had to do a mix in 1.5 days or 2 days, and then it's done. So it's great. I can work for 2 hours on one mix. Actually, I realized that I do the majority of work on a mix in my car or while jogging, because tweaking it takes 5 seconds. It's just contemplating and thinking and listening to it in the car and in the head, on the phone and all that, and making decisions. That's what takes the majority of the time. And then you come back and you tweak it in 5 seconds another day or a month later or whatever. So yeah, I'm working on several very interesting projects, as well as my continuous involvement with Waves, where I develop plugins and synthesizers. And one thing which I would probably regret saying it, but that Steve touched the subject of sustain and continuous and attack and things like that. We're actually working on something like that, not like that, but
interesting.
Something very interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, don't say any more because you'll have to kill us, and I don't want that to happen.
Exactly.
That's just quickly. That's a really interesting thing. So you think it's? Do you find it more productive to work in smaller chunks, broken up, rather than sit in front of something for hours and hours and hours?
Absolutely. For me, at this point in time, I would say that I've graduated by spending years and years of 18-hour days in front of the desk, coming back home, feeling and looking like an ashtray, sleeping for a few hours and coming back to the studio. So I've done that for many years, and now I can enjoy the fruits of that, as well as the abilities that the technology brings. So I don't know if I would recommend that to someone who's just starting their way in that profession, but for me it definitely works.
Very interesting. Yoad, it's been a pleasure having you aboard. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you'll be able to join us again at some point in the future. And I know we talked about, maybe getting some screens up and doing all sorts of fancy stuff your end as well. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure. And also, Mr. Ben Wilson, DivKid Video, check him out on YouTube. Thank you for joining us as well. It's always a pleasure to have you aboard too.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. And just to really quickly speak to what Yoad said, I think, as much, I know you've got to put the time in and learn the gear. So if you're starting out, I think trying to work minimally maybe doesn't work. But it's definitely a method I find useful. A lot of listening in the car, listening on the way to work. Like Yoad said, actually tweaking settings on a mix is very quick. I think if you go in with a real intention, I've been really trying to get my productivity up, both post baby and just in general. And I think having the intention laid out before I turn anything on is the key for me at the minute.
Interesting idea.
And still playing around, still putting time into playing and learning, but keep that separate. And if it's for work, it's really intentful. I'm not kind of learning on the job, if that makes sense. I try and keep that separate. Yeah,
I understand that. Ben, thank you also for yours. Just quickly, if you want to enter the Ozone 8 competition, we're looking for the hashtag 4GreatMixes. That's FOR Great Mixes, and the hashtag Ozone 8 to @Sonicstate and @Isotope Inc. That's 4GreatMixes and Ozone 8, 2 hashtags to @Sonicstate and @Isotope Inc. to enter the competition. That's it. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much for watching. That's it for this time. Bye-bye now.